Gil Scott-Heron. Gilbert Scott-Heron, April 1, 1949, May 27, 2011, was an American soul and jazz poet, musician, and author, known primarily for his work as a spoken-word performer in the 1970s and 1980s. His collaborative efforts with musician Brian Jackson featured a musical fusion of jazz, blues, and soul, as well as lyrical content concerning social and political issues of the time, delivered in both rapping and melismatic vocal styles by Scott-Heron. His own term for himself was bluesologist, which he defined as a scientist who is concerned with the origin of the blues. His poem "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," delivered over a jazz soul beat, is considered a major influence on hip-hop music. His music, most notably on the albums Pieces of a Man and Winter in America in the early 1970s, influenced and foreshadowed later African American music genres such as hip-hop. His recording work received much critical acclaim, especially for "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." AllMusic's John Bush called him one of the most important progenitors of rap music, stating that his aggressive, no-nonsense street poetry inspired a legion of intelligent rappers, while his engaging songwriting skills placed him square in the R&B charts later in his career. A memoir he had been working on for years up to the time of his death, The Last Holiday, was published posthumously in January 2012. Scott-Heron received a posthumous Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2012. He also is included in the exhibits at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in MAAHC that officially opened on September 24. In 2021, Scott-Heron was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a recipient of the Early Influence Award. Early years. Gil Scott-Heron was born in Chicago, Illinois. His mother, Bobby Scott, was an opera singer who performed with the Oratorio Society of New York. His father, Gil Herron, nicknamed the Black Arrow, was a Jamaican footballer who in the 1950s became the first black man to play for Celtic Football Club in Glasgow, Scotland. Gil's parents separated in his early childhood, and he was sent to live with his maternal grandmother. When Scott-Heron was 12 years old, his grandmother died, and he returned to live with his mother in the Bronx in New York City. He enrolled at DeWitt Clinton High School, but later transferred to the Fieldston School after impressing the head of the English department with some of his writings and earning a full scholarship. As one of 5 black students at the prestigious school, Scott-Heron was faced with alienation and a significant socioeconomic gap. During his admissions interview at Fieldston, an administrator asked him, "How would you feel if you see one of your classmates go by in a limousine while you're walking up the hill from the subway?" And he said, "Same way as you all can't afford no limousine." How do you feel? This type of intractable boldness would become a hallmark of Scott-Heron's later recordings. After completing his secondary education, Scott-Heron decided to attend Lincoln University in Pennsylvania because Langston Hughes, his most important literary influence, was an alumnus. It was here that Scott-Heron met Brian Jackson, with whom he formed the band Black and Blues. After about 2 years at Lincoln, Scott-Heron took a year off to write the novels The Vulture and The Nigger Factory. Scott-Heron was very heavily influenced by the Black Arts Movement (BAM). The Last Poets, a group associated with the Black Arts Movement, performed at Lincoln in 1969, and Abiodun Oyewole of that Harlem group said Scott-Heron asked him after the performance, "Listen, can I start a group like you guys?" Scott-Heron returned to New York City, settling in Chelsea, Manhattan. The Vulture was published by the World Publishing Company in 1970 to positive reviews. Although Scott-Heron never completed his undergraduate degree, he was admitted to the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins University, where he received an M.A. in creative writing in 1972. His master's thesis was titled Circle of Stone. Beginning in 1972, Scott-Heron taught literature and creative writing for several years as a full-time lecturer at University of the District of Columbia, then known as Federal City College in Washington, D.C., while maintaining his music career. Recording career. Scott-Heron began his recording career with the LP Small Talk at 125th and Lenox in 1970. Bob Thiele of Flying Dutchman Records produced the album, and Scott-Heron was accompanied by Eddie Knowles and Charlie Saunders on conga and David Barnes on percussion and vocals. The album's 14 tracks dealt with themes such as the superficiality of television and mass consumerism, the hypocrisy of some would-be black revolutionaries, and white middle-class ignorance of the difficulties faced by inner-city residents. In the liner notes, Scott-Heron acknowledged as influences Richie Havens, John Coltrane, Otis Redding, Jose Feliciano, Billie Holiday, Langston Hughes, Malcolm X, Huey Newton, Nina Simone, and longtime collaborator Brian Jackson. Scott-Heron's 1971 album Pieces of a Man used more conventional song structures than the loose, spoken-word feel of Small Talk. He was joined by Jackson, Johnny Pate as conductor, Ron Carter on bass and bass guitar, drummer Bernard Pretty Purdy, Burt Jones playing electric guitar, and Hubert Laws on flute and saxophone, with Thiele producing again. Scott-Heron's third album, Free Will, was released in 1972. Jackson, Purdy, Laws, Knowles, and Saunders all returned to play on Free Will and were joined by Jerry Jamot playing bass, David Spinazza on guitar, and Horace Ott arranger and conductor. Carter later said about Scott-Heron's voice, "He was a great singer, but with that voice, if he had whispered it would have been dynamic." 1974 saw another LP collaboration with Brian Jackson, the critically acclaimed opus Winter in America, with Bob Adams on drums and Danny Bowens on bass, on bass, on bass, on bass. The album contained Scott-Heron's most cohesive material and featured more of Jackson's creative input than his previous albums had. Winter in America has been regarded by many critics as the two musicians' most artistic effort. The following year, Scott-Heron and Jackson released Midnight Band, the first minute of a new day. 1975 saw the release of the single Johannesburg, a rallying cry to the issue of apartheid in South Africa. The song would be reissued in 12-single form together with Waiting for the Axe to Fall and Be Movie in 1983. A live album, It's Your World, followed in 1976, and a recording of spoken poetry, The Mind of Gil Scott-Heron, was released in 1978. Another success followed with the hit single Angel Dust, which he recorded as a single with producer Malcolm Cecil. Angel Dust peaked at number 15 on the R&B charts in 1978. In 1979, Scott-Heron played at the No Nukes concerts at Madison Square Garden. The concerts were organized by Musicians United for Safe Energy to protest the use of nuclear energy following the 3 Mile Island accident. Scott-Heron's song We Almost Lost Detroit was included in the No Nukes album of concert highlights. It alluded to a previous nuclear power plant accident and was also the title of a book by John G. Fuller. Scott-Heron was a frequent critic of President Ronald Reagan and his conservative policies. Scott-Heron recorded and released 4 albums during the 1980s, 1980 and Realize 1980, Reflections 1981, and Moving Target 1982. In February 1982, Ron Holloway joined the ensemble to play tenor saxophone. He toured extensively with Scott-Heron and contributed to his next album, Moving Target, the same year. His tenor accompaniment is a prominent feature of the songs Fast Lane and Black History/The World. Holloway continued with Scott-Heron until the summer of 1989, when he left to join Dizzy Gillespie. Several years later, Scott-Heron would make cameo appearances on 2 of Ron Holloway's CD, Scorcher 1996 and Groove Update 1998, both on the Fantasy/Milestone label. Scott-Heron was dropped by Arista Records in 1985 and quit recording, though he continued to tour. The same year, he helped compose and sang Let Me See Your ID on the Artists United Against Apartheid album Sun City, containing the famous line, "The first time I heard there was trouble in the Middle East, I thought they were talking about Pittsburgh." The song compares racial tensions in the U.S. with those in apartheid-era South Africa, implying that the U.S. was not too far ahead in race relations. In 1993, he signed to TVT Records and released Spirits, an album that included the seminal track Message to the Messengers. The first track on the album criticized the rap artists of the day. Scott-Heron is known in many circles as the godfather of rap and is widely considered to be one of the genre's founding fathers. Given the political consciousness that lies at the foundation of his work, he can also be called a founder of political rap. Message to the Messengers was a plea for the new generation of rappers to speak for change rather than perpetuate the current social situation, and to be more articulate and artistic. Regarding hip-hop music in the 1990s, he said in an interview they need to study music. I played in several bands before I began my career as a poet. There's a big difference between putting words over some music and blending those same words into the music. There's not a lot of humor. They use a lot of slang and colloquialisms, and you don't really see inside the person. Instead, you just get a lot of posturing. Later years, prison terms and more performing. In 2001, Scott-Heron was sentenced to 1 to 3 years imprisonment in a New York State prison for possession of cocaine. While out of jail in 2002, he appeared on the Blazing Arrow album by Blackalicious. He was released on parole in 2003, the year BBC TV broadcast the documentary Gil Scott-Heron, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. Scott-Heron was arrested for possession of a crack pipe during the editing of the film in October 2003 and received a 6-month prison sentence. On July 5, 2006, Scott-Heron was sentenced to 2 to 4 years in a New York State prison. He claimed that he left because the clinic refused to supply him with HIV medication. This story led to the presumption that the artist was HIV positive, subsequently confirmed in a 2008 interview. Originally sentenced to serve until July 13, 2009, he was paroled on May 23, 2007. After his release, Scott-Heron began performing live again, starting with a show at SOB Restaurant and Nightclub in New York on September 13, 2007. On stage, he stated that he and his musicians were working on a new album and that he had resumed writing a book titled The Last Holiday, previously on long-term hiatus, about Stevie Wonder and his successful attempt to have the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. declared a federally recognized holiday in the United States. Malik al-Nasir dedicated a collection of poetry to Scott-Heron titled Ordinary Guy that contained a foreword by Jalal Mansur Nuruddin of the Last Poets. Scott-Heron recorded one of the poems in Nasir's book entitled Black. In April 2009, on BBC Radio 4, poet Lem Sissay presented a half-hour documentary on Gil Scott-Heron entitled Pieces of a Man, having interviewed Gil Scott-Heron in New York a month earlier. Pieces of a Man was the first UK announcement from Scott-Heron of his forthcoming album and return to form. In November 2009, the BBC Newsnight interviewed Scott-Heron for a feature titled The Legendary Godfather of Rap Returns. In 2009, a new Gil Scott-Heron website, Gil-Scott-Heron.net, was launched with a new track Where Did the Night Go made available as a free download from the site. In 2010, Scott-Heron was booked to perform in Tel Aviv, Israel, but this attracted criticism from pro-Palestinian activists who stated your performance in Israel would be the equivalent to having performed in Sun City during South Africa's apartheid era. We hope that you will not play apartheid Israel. Scott-Heron responded by canceling the performance. I'm new here, new here, new here, new here, new here, new here, new here. New here, 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 new here. Scott-Heron released his album I'm New Here on independent label Excel Recordings on February 9, 2010. Produced by Excel label owner Richard Russell, I'm New Here was Scott-Heron's first studio album in 16 years. The pair started recording the album in 2007, with the majority of the record being recorded over the 12 months leading up to the release date with engineer Lawson White at Clinton Studios in New York. I'm New Here is 28 minutes long with 15 tracks, however. Casual asides and observations collected during recording sessions are included as interludes. The album attracted critical acclaim, with The Guardian's Jude Rogers declaring it one of the best of the next decade, while some have called the record reverent and intimate, due to Scott-Heron's half-sung, half-spoken delivery of his poetry. In a music review for Public Radio Network NPR, Will Hermes stated, "Comeback records always worry me, especially when they are made by one of my heroes, but I was haunted by this record. He's made a record not without hope, but which doesn't come with any easy or comforting answers. In that way, the man is clearly still committed to speaking the truth." Writing for music website music.OMH, Darren Lee provided a more mixed assessment of the album, describing it as rewarding and stunning, but he also states that the album's brevity prevents it from being an unassailable masterpiece. Scott-Heron described himself as a mere participant in a 2010 interview with The New Yorker. This is Richard's CD. "My only knowledge when I got to the studio was how he seemed to have wanted this for a long time. You're in a position to have somebody do something that they really want to do, and it was not something that would hurt me or damage me. Why not? All the dreams you show up in are not your own." The remix version of the album, We're New Here, was released in 2011, featuring production by English musician Jamie Roman 20, who reworked material from the original album. Like the original album, We're New Here received critical acclaim. In April 2014, Excel Recordings announced a third album from the I'm New Here sessions, titled Nothing New. The album consists of stripped-down piano and vocal recordings, and was released in conjunction with Record Store Day on April 19, 2014. Death. Scott-Heron died on the afternoon of May 27, 2011, at St. Luke's Hospital, New York City, after becoming ill upon returning from a trip to Europe. Scott-Heron had confirmed previous press speculation about his health when he disclosed in a 2008 New York Magazine interview that he had been HIV positive for several years and that he had been previously hospitalized for pneumonia. He was survived by his firstborn daughter, Raquel Kelly Herron, from his relationship with Pat Kelly, his son Rumel Rackley from his relationship with Lermer Rackley, daughter Jaya Scott-Heron from his marriage to Brenda Sykes, and daughter Chegina Newton, who was 13 years old at the time of her father's death. He is also survived by his sister Gail, brother Denny's Herron, who once managed Scott-Heron, his uncle, Roy Herron, and nephew Terrence Kelly, an actor and rapper who performs as Mr. Cheeks and is a member of Lost Boys. Before his death, Scott-Heron had been in talks with Portuguese director Pedro Costa to participate in his film Horse Money as a screenwriter, composer, and actor. After Scott-Heron's death, Malik Al-Nasir told The Guardian's Simon Hatton-Stone of the kindness that Scott-Heron had showed him throughout his adult life since meeting the poet backstage at a gig in Liverpool in 1984. The BBC World Service covered the story on their Outlook program with Matthew Bannister, which took the story global. It was subsequently covered in other media such as BBC Radio 4's Saturday Live, where jazz musician Al Jarreau paid tribute to Gil, and was mentioned the U.S. edition of Rolling Stone and the Huffington Post. Malik and the OGs performed a tribute to Scott-Heron at the Liverpool International Music Festival in 2013 with jazz composer Orphy Robinson of the Jazz Warriors and Rod Youngs from Gil's band The Amnesia Express. Another tribute was performed at St. George's Hall in Liverpool on August 27, 2015, called The Revolution Will Be Live, curated by Malik Al-Nasir and Richard Magini's for Yesternight Productions. The event featured Talib Kweli, Aswad the Christians, Malik and the OGs, Sophia Ben Yosef, and Cleveland Wackes, as well as DJ Too Kind and poet, actor, and radio DJ Craig Charles. The tribute was the opening event for 2015 Liverpool International Music Festival. In response to Scott-Heron's death, Public Enemy's Chuck D stated RIPGSH. And we do what we do and how we do because of you on his Twitter account. His UK publisher, Jamie Byng, called him one of the most inspiring people I've ever met. On hearing of the death, R&B singer Usher stated, I just learned of the loss of a very important poet. R.I.P. Gil Scott-Heron. The revolution will be live. Richard Russell, who produced Scott-Heron's final studio album, called him a father figure of sorts to me, while Eminem stated, he influenced all of hip-hop. Lupe Fiasco wrote a poem about Scott-Heron that was published on his website. Scott-Heron's memorial service was held at Riverside Church in New York City on June 2, 2011, where Kanye West performed Lost in the World and Who Will Survive in America, two songs from West's album My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. The studio album version of West's Who Will Survive in America features a spoken word excerpt by Scott-Heron. Scott-Heron is buried at Kensico Cemetery in Westchester County in New York. Scott-Heron was honored posthumously in 2012 by the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences with a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. Charlotte Fox, member of the Washington, D.C. NARAs and president of Genesis Poets Music, nominated Scott-Heron for the award, while the letter of support came from Grammy Award winner and Grammy Hall of Fame inductee Bill Withers. Scott-Heron's memoir, The Last Holiday, was published in January 2012. In her review for the Los Angeles Times, professor of English and journalism Lionel George wrote, The Last Holiday is as much about his life as it is about context, the theater of late 20th century America, from Jim Crow to the Reagan 80s, and from Beale Street to 57th Street. The narrative is not, however, a rise and fall retelling of Scott-Heron's life and career. It doesn't connect all the dots. It moves off the beat at its own speed, own speed, own speed, bitter speed, own speed. This approach to revelation lends the book an episodic quality, like oral storytelling does. It winds around, it repeats itself. Scott-Heron's estate. At the time of Scott-Heron's death, a will could not be found to determine the future of his estate. Additionally, Raquia Kelly Herron filed papers in Manhattan, New York's surrogate's court in August 2013, claiming that Rummel Rackley is not Scott-Heron's son and should therefore be omitted from matters concerning the musician's estate. According to the Daily News website, Rackley, Kelly Herron, and two other sisters have been seeking a resolution to the issue of the management of Scott-Heron's estate, as Rackley stated in court papers that Scott-Heron prepared him to be the eventual administrator of the estate. Scott-Heron's 1994 album Spirits was dedicated to my son Rummel and my daughters Naya and Jaya, and in court papers Rackley added that Scott-Heron introduced me Rackley from the stage as his son. In 2011, Rackley filed a suit against sister Jaya Scott-Heron and her mother, Scott-Heron's first wife, Brenda Sykes, as he believed they had unfairly attained $250,000 of Scott-Heron's money. The case was later settled for an undisclosed sum in early 2013, but the relationship between Rackley and Scott-Heron's two adult daughters already had become strained in the months after Gil's death. In her submission to the surrogate's court, Kelly Herron states that a DNA test completed by Rackley in 2011 using DNA from Scott-Heron's brother revealed that they do not share a common male lineage, while Rackley has refused to undertake another DNA test since that time. A hearing to address Kelly Herron's filing was scheduled for late August 2013, but by March 2016 further information on the matter was not publicly available. Rackley still serves as court-appointed administrator. In December 2018, the surrogate court ruled that Rummel Rackley and his half-sisters are all legal heirs. According to the Daily News website, Kelly Herron and two other sisters have been seeking a resolution to the issue of the management of Scott-Heron's estate. The case was decided in December 2018, with a ruling issued in May 2019. Influence and legacy. Scott-Heron's work has influenced writers, academics, and musicians, from indie rockers to rappers. His work during the 1970s influenced and helped engender subsequent African American music genres, such as hip-hop and neo-soul. He has been described by music writers as the godfather of rap and the Black Bob Dylan. Chicago Tribune writer Greg Kot comments on Scott-Heron's collaborative work with Jackson. Together they crafted jazz-influenced soul and funk that brought new depth and political consciousness to 70s music alongside Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder. In classic albums such as Winter in America and From South Africa to South Carolina, Scott-Heron took the news of the day and transformed it into social commentary. He updated his dispatches from the front lines of the inner city on tour, improvising lyrics with an improvisational daring that matched the jazz soul swirl of the music. Of Scott-Heron's influence on hip-hop, Van Cesario of the New York Times writes that Scott-Heron preferred to call himself a bluesologist, drawing on the traditions of blues, jazz, and Harlem Renaissance poetics. Trice McCall of the Star Ledger writes that the arrangements on Gil Scott-Heron's early recordings were consistent with the conventions of jazz poetry, the movement that sought to bring the spontaneity of live performance to the reading of verse. A music writer later noted that Scott-Heron's unique proto-rap style influenced a generation of hip-hop artists, while the Washington Post wrote that Scott-Heron's work presaged not only conscious rap and poetry slams, but also acid jazz, particularly during his rewarding collaboration with composer, keyboardist, flutist Brian Jackson in the mid and late. The Observer's Sean O'Hagan discussed the significance of Scott-Heron's music with Brian Jackson, stating, "Together throughout the 1970s, Scott-Heron and Jackson made music that reflected the turbulence, uncertainty, and increasing pessimism of the times, merging the soul and jazz traditions and drawing on an oral poetry tradition that reached back to the blues and forward to hip-hop. The music sounded by turns angry, defiant, and regretful, while Scott-Heron's lyrics possessed a satirical edge that set them apart from the militant soul of contemporaries such as Marvin Gaye and Curtis Mayfield." Will Lehman of Pop Matters wrote about the significance of Scott-Heron's early musical work. In the early 1970s, Gil Scott-Heron popped onto the scene as a soul poet with jazz leanings, not just another Bill Withers, but a political voice with a poet's skill. His spoken voice work had punch and topicality. "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised" and "Johannesburg" were calls to action. Stokely Carmichael of Heed had the groove of Ray Charles. "The Bottle" was a poignant story of the streets. Richard Wright as sung by a husky-voiced Marvin Gaye. To paraphrase Chuck D. Gil Scott-Heron's music was a kind of CNN for black neighborhoods, prefiguring hip-hop by several years. It grew from the last poets, but it also had the funky swing of Horace Silver or Herbie Hancock or Otis Redding. "Pieces of a Man" and "Winter in America" collaborations with Brian Jackson were classics beyond category. Scott-Heron's influence over hip-hop is primarily exemplified by his definitive single "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," sentiments from which have been explored by various rappers, including Aesop Rock, Talib Kweli, and Common. In addition to his vocal style, Scott-Heron's indirect contributions to rap music extend to his and co-producer Jackson's compositions, which have been sampled by various hip-hop artists. "We Almost Lost Detroit" was sampled by Brand Nubian member Grand Puba Keep-On, Native Tongues duo Black Star Brown Skin Lady, and MF Doom Camphor. Additionally, Scott-Heron's 1980 song "A Legend in His Own Mind" was sampled on Mos Def's "Mr. Nigga." The opening lyrics from his 1978 recording "Angel Dust" were appropriated by rapper RBX on the 1996 song "Blunt Time" by Dr. Dre, and CeCe Peniston's 2000 song "My Boo" samples Scott-Heron's night. In addition to the Scott-Heron excerpt used in "Who Will Survive in America," Kanye West sampled Scott-Heron and Jackson's Home is Where the Hatred Is, and We Almost Lost Detroit for the songs My Way Home and The People, respectively, both of which are collaborative efforts with Common. Scott-Heron, in turn, acknowledged West's contributions, sampling the latter's 2007 single Flashing Lights on his final album, 2010's I'm New Here. Scott-Heron admitted ambivalence regarding his association with rap, remarking in 2010 in an interview for the Daily Swarm, "I don't know if I can take the blame for rap music." As New York Times writer Cesario explained, he preferred the moniker of bluesologist, referring to reviews of his last album and references to him as the godfather of rap. In 2013, Chattanooga rapper Isaiah Rashid recorded an unofficial mixtape called Pieces of a Kid, which was greatly influenced by Herron's debut album Pieces of a Man. Following Scott-Heron's funeral in 2011, a tribute from publisher, record company owner, poet, and music producer Malik Al-Nasir was published on The Guardian's website, titled Gil Scott-Heron Saved My Life. In the 2018 film First Man, Scott-Heron is a minor character and is played by soul singer Leon Bridges. He is one of 8 significant people shown in mosaic at the 167th Street renovated subway station on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx that reopened in 2019. Discography: studio albums, live albums, compilations, collaboration albums, soundtracks, film scores, filmography. Saturday Night Live, musical guest, December 13, 1975. Black Wax, 1982. Directed by Robert Mugg. Five Sides of a Coin, 2004. Directed by Paul Kell. The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, 2005. Directed by Don Letts for BBC. The Paris Concert, 2007. Tales of the Amnesia Express live at the Town and Country, 1988.